When an empath is done, they stop performing for connection. It sounds so simple, but for someone who has spent a lifetime tuning into the emotions of others, often at the expense of their own, this shift is seismic. It's not an act of rebellion or retaliation. It's not revenge. It's a quiet, powerful revolution rooted in clarity and exhaustion. Emotional, spiritual, and physical exhaustion. Empaths are natural feelers. They sense what's unspoken. They anticipate needs before they're articulated. They soften conflict, absorb tension, and carry burdens that were never theirs to hold. This is often mistaken for weakness or neediness, but it's not. It's a deep capacity to love, to see, to hold space. It's a gift, but like all gifts, when misused or unprotected, it can turn into a source of deep pain. For most of their lives, empaths perform, not in the theatrical sense, but in a deeply internal one. They perform by people-pleasing, by adapting, by shape-shifting into who others need them to be. They perform love by staying too long. They perform understanding by staying silent. They perform loyalty by tolerating emotional neglect or abuse. And they do it because somewhere along the way they learn that love must be earned, that it's transactional, that their value is tied to how much they give, how much they forgive, how much they endure. This is where the performance begins. And it's not conscious. It's survival. It's protection. It's trying to make unsafe situations feel safe, trying to extract warmth from coldness, trying to create belonging in places that only ever offered conditional acceptance. But the empath who is done, they've stopped. Not because they've become cold, they've become awake. When an empath reaches the end, it doesn't look like drama. It doesn't come with screaming or slamming doors. It comes with stillness, with space, with the quiet, unwavering knowing that they cannot keep betraying themselves to belong to someone else. That performing connection is not the same as experiencing real intimacy. That love that requires them to lose themselves is not love. It's control. It's dependency. It's emotional manipulation dressed up as partnership. This kind of awakening doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a slow unraveling, through nights spent questioning their worth, through the realization that being too sensitive was never the problem. The problem was being surrounded by people who refused to be sensitive at all. It happens after being gaslit so many times that they finally stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Why am I still here?" The moment the empath is done is the moment they stop trying to prove their worth to someone who has already decided not to see it. They stop offering explanations. They stop justifying their feelings. They stop trying to decode mixed signals and ambiguous silence. Instead, they listen to the quiet voice within, the one that says, "You don't have to keep living like this." And for the first time, they believe it. This isn't bitterness. This is liberation. This isn't giving up. It's letting go. Because empaths don't give up easily. That's why they stay too long. That's why they try too hard. They believe in redemption, in healing, in second chances. But when they're done, they've finally accepted that they can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. That no amount of love, patience, or compassion will reach someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own pain or action. And so they stop performing. They start telling the truth, not just to others, but to themselves. The truth about what they feel, the truth about what they need, the truth about what they've tolerated in the name of love and what they'll never tolerate again. They begin to rewrite the story not as a victim, but as someone who now understands that empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. There's a different kind of energy in someone who's finally done. It's not loud, it's not vengeful, it's grounded, it's whole. It's the energy of someone who no longer needs validation because they've stopped outsourcing their self-worth. They've stopped being available for people who only show up when it's convenient. They've stopped internalizing someone else's inability to love as proof that they're unlovable. Empaths who are done become powerful not because they've stopped feeling, but because they've learned to feel without losing themselves. They know that love is not measured by how much pain you can endure. They understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. And some doors are meant to stay closed, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. So when they stop performing for connection, what they're really doing is making room for real connection, for relationships where their sensitivity is seen as a strength, not a liability, for people who meet them halfway, for conversations that don't require emotional translation, for love that doesn't demand their silence in exchange for belonging. The empath who is done is not a danger because they're angry. They're a danger because they're free. Because they finally understand their own worth. Boundaries are the language of self-respect. It's a simple sentence, but it carries a depth that many of us have to learn the hard way. When we think about boundaries, we often imagine walls or defenses, something rigid and unmovable. But real boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping ourselves intact. They're not ultimatums, they're declarations of truth. They're how we say to the world, this is who I am, what I value, and what I will and will not allow in my life. For a long time, especially for empaths or deeply compassionate people, boundaries can feel like betrayal. Saying no feels like rejection. Asking for space feels like abandonment. Choosing yourself feels selfish. Why? Because many of us were raised to believe that love means sacrifice without limit, that goodness equals availability, and that being liked is more important than being whole. We're taught to accommodate, to soothe, to bend ourselves into shapes that keep the peace, even if that peace is just the absence of conflict, not the presence of safety. But there comes a moment usually after repeated experiences of being taken for granted, manipulated, or emotionally drained. When we realize that loving others well does not require us. In fact, true love cannot exist without boundaries. Love without boundaries becomes enabling. Compassion without boundaries becomes martyrdom. And empathy without boundaries becomes emotional erosion. You begin to lose yourself piece by piece in the name of being the bigger person. Boundaries are not punishment. They are not retribution. They are not a weapon. They are a mirror. They reflect back to us what we believe about our own worth. When we believe we matter, we act like we matter. We stop tolerating what drains us. We stop minimizing what hurts us. We stop staying in conversations, dynamics, or relationships where we are repeatedly asked to betray our values or our needs. We begin to see that self-respect isn't just about confidence. It's about behavior. It's about choices. It's about drawing a line, not to shut people out, but to keep yourself rooted. Some people will be uncomfortable when you set a boundary, especially if they've benefited from you not having any. That's not a sign that the boundary is wrong. That's a sign that the dynamic has been imbalanced. When you start saying no, when you stop over-explaining, when you ask for what you need without guilt, you're changing the rules of engagement. And some people will resist that change. They'll call you cold. They'll say you've changed. They may even accuse you of being selfish or dramatic. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer playing the role I assigned to you. That role might have been the fixer, the peacekeeper, or the one who always says yes. But once you step out of that role, you begin to take up your real life. You begin to show up not as a version of yourself edited for someone else's comfort, but as your full, honest self. And yes, that honesty might cost you some relationships. But the relationships that fall away when you start honoring your boundaries were never rooted in real love. They were rooted in convenience, control, or codependence. Respect isn't something we demand from others with our words. It's something we teach them through our actions. Every time we allow behavior that hurts us, we reinforce the message that it's okay. Every time we minimize our needs, we teach people that our feelings are negotiable. But when we hold a boundary, not with anger, but with clarity, we invite others to meet us on healthier ground. Some will rise to that invitation. Some won't. And both are valuable forms of information. It's also important to recognize that setting boundaries doesn't mean building a fortress and never letting anyone in. It means creating a space where intimacy, connection, and vulnerability can thrive, because they're not being threatened by resentment, overextension, or self-betrayal. When you have clear boundaries, you can love more freely because you know your love isn't costing you your well-being. You can be generous without being depleted. You can be compassionate without becoming consumed. There's a quiet confidence that begins to grow when you live with boundaries. You stop apologizing for your needs. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into places that can't hold your full presence. You start walking away from situations that once had you spiraling. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned that caring for others means nothing if it always comes at the expense of caring for yourself. Boundaries don't make you hard, they make you honest. They're not a wall between you and the world, they're the bridge between who you are and the kind of life you want to build. They protect your energy, your peace, your purpose, and perhaps most importantly, they protect your heart so that when you give it, it's not out of obligation, fear, or performance, but out of truth. To set a boundary is to say, I choose myself, not because I'm better than you, but because I've spent too long abandoning myself to make you comfortable. I choose peace, not because I'm avoiding hard things, but because I'm done mistaking chaos for connection. I choose clarity, not because I'm unkind, but because I've learned that unclear expectations breed resentment and miscommunication. So yes, boundaries are the language of self-respect. They are not the end of connection. They are the beginning of real, mutual, healthy connection. They're how we say, this is where I end and you begin. And both of us matter here. There is no courage without vulnerability, but there is also no healing without accountability. These two truths are inseparable. You cannot truly grow without facing both. Vulnerability cracks us open so that the light can get in, but accountability keeps that light from becoming blinding ego. One without the other is incomplete. Vulnerability without accountability risks becoming performative. Accountability without vulnerability becomes punitive, but when they come together, they transform us. To be vulnerable is to allow ourselves to be seen, to admit we're hurt, afraid, confused, or uncertain. Vulnerability is the moment you say, I'm not okay, or this hurt me, or I'm scared to leave, but I know I can't stay. It's not weakness, it's not attention seeking, it's truth-telling at its most raw. It's the foundation of connection, the birthplace of empathy, and the pathway to change. But vulnerability alone is not enough to heal what's been broken. Healing requires more than acknowledgement. It requires responsibility. It requires the willingness to look at what happened, name it with honesty, and own our role in it, whether we were the one harmed or the one who caused harm. This is where so many people get stuck. They want the freedom of healing without the discomfort of accountability. They want peace without doing the repair work. They want redemption without apology, forgiveness without reckoning, trust without truth. But healing is not a passive process. You don't simply wait long enough and hope the pain will fade. You participate in it. You show up for it. You do the hard, unglamorous, soul-stretching work of naming the patterns, setting the boundaries, asking the hard questions, and having the uncomfortable conversations. You stop running from the pain and start learning from it. When someone says they've changed, but they refuse to acknowledge what they've done, they're not speaking from a place of healing. They're speaking from a place of avoidance. And when someone tries to silence you for speaking the truth of what happened, when they say you're living in the past or holding a grudge, what they're really saying is, I don't want to be uncomfortable with the impact of my action. That's not healing. That's deflection. True healing means we stop centering comfort and start centering growth. And growth is always uncomfortable. Growth demands that we look at ourselves honestly, that we take responsibility for how we showed up, that we stop blaming everyone else for the story we're living and start asking, what part of me keeps saying yes when I mean no? What part of me thought I deserved that treatment? What do I need to change to stop repeating this? It's not about self-blame, it's about self-awareness. It's about recognizing that even when we weren't at fault, we are still responsible for our healing. And when we were the ones who caused harm, we are responsible for making it right. That responsibility is not shame, it's integrity. Shame says, I am bad. Accountability says, I did something wrong and I'm going to take action to repair it. The people who do the most damage are often the ones who refuse both vulnerability and accountability. They don't want to feel and they don't want to own. They shift blame, they deny, they rewrite history, they dismiss your experience, and they call it moving on. But there is no true moving on without moving through. And you can't move through what you refuse to face. When someone says, I'm sorry you feel that way, that's not accountability. That's distancing. That's putting the responsibility for your pain back on you. Accountability sounds like, I see how I hurt you. I understand the impact. I take full responsibility and I'm willing to do the work to make it right. That kind of language requires vulnerability. It requires humility. And it requires a willingness to sit in discomfort long enough for change to take root. Sometimes we want to protect people from the truth because we're afraid they can't handle it. We sugarcoat it. We downplay it. We rush to forgiveness. But truth without accountability breeds resentment. Forgiveness without accountability breeds repetition. You can forgive someone in your heart and still require accountability in your life. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. You can love someone and still say, this is not okay. Accountability is not about punishment, it's about transformation. When someone is truly accountable, you can feel the difference. They don't try to manipulate the narrative. They don't ask for a second chance without earning it. They show up with changed behavior, not just words. And when we hold ourselves accountable, we stop pretending we're powerless. We stop waiting for someone else to fix it. We become the authors of our own healing. There is strength in saying I was wrong. There is power in saying I need to do better. And there is freedom in no longer needing to carry the weight of someone else's denial. Vulnerability cracks us open, but accountability is what makes the opening matter. It's what turns pain into purpose. It's what allows us to not only heal, but to grow, to become.